Wealthy retirees have started to sell assets and restructure investment portfolios to avoid Labor's planned increased taxes on superannuation savings above $3 million. According to the AFR, some high-income earners aged in their 40s have stopped putting additional money into their self-managed funds because of uncertainty surrounding the Albanese government's proposed tax on unrealised gains, which, put simply, are taxes on profits that haven't happened yet and potentially might not happen. The government is relying on the projected $40 billion in long-term revenue to fund its election commitments.
I think the biggest one that we're seeing at the moment is how they're going to get unrealised profit expectations on unlisted assets. So, the example put straight out is property, particularly things like farms, particularly things like commercial property. What's it worth? And not only is what it's worth, how do you then pay the tax on the proposed unrealised gains of that property?
Yeah, and as I spoke to Evan about, who decides what it's worth? Liberal MP Tim Wilson penned his criticism of the reform in today's Financial Review. This is part of it. He says the failure to campaign against unrealised capital gains was not the greatest failure of the Coalition's last election campaign. It was the greatest failure of their last 3 years. Adding the tax is a slippery slope. Once the administration of this tax is set up, it'll be ported to other assets and structures from property, businesses and trusts, as I spoke to Evan about. It will have negative impacts. That's part of it from Tim Wilson. Well, joining us live for more now is the Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg. Good to see you, Andrew. So is Tim right? Was this a coalition failure not to oppose this more strongly during the campaign?
Well, good morning, Pete. The nation's finances are very sick, and this best shows the disaster of Labor's economic mismanagement, that you would tax money and profits that are illusory or not real. And so we've never had a tax in Australian history on money that isn't actually in existence. So many of these profits will be just paper profits that could be there 1 year and just disappear the next. So it is a very unfair concept.
It is an absurd proposition when you think about it, and is under the category of classic socialism here. But why wasn't it argued more strongly during the campaign by the Coalition?
Well, I think it is true that there was more we could have done to unpack the risk of this being expanded. Now, this is already in the budget, billions of dollars booked in the budget, but it hasn't passed Parliament. So the government will have to do a dirty deal with the Greens to get this tax through. And in the process, they could well expand it to other assets or lower the threshold, for example, because the government doesn't have the numbers in the Senate. So there's a huge risk of being expanded to other assets and vehicles.
So are you hamstrung now? Because, as you say, all they need are the Greens in the Senate. This goes through. It becomes law.
Well, if it becomes law, you'll have a crazy tax on the books. It will damage investment, particularly around nimble, disruptive investment, the sort of investment that we need in an economy which is really in danger, I think, of heading backwards over the next 10 years. I mean, the budget's already buggered. And frankly, the rest of the economy, I think, is in huge danger. So damaging investment into disruptive ideas, I think, is going to be on the books. And so this will be a terrible day if it does pass the Parliament with the Green support. But I'm sure that the threshold will change, or the assets that are covered will be expanded.
Won't smart people with smart accountants just move their money around, as we're seeing reports in the AFR today is already happening? Won't people just move their money around before you hit that threshold, therefore creating problems somewhere else?
Well, of course, because the budget already contains this tax revenue. It's already in the budget, even though it hasn't passed Parliament. So if people move things around, the tax revenue collected from this measure will be lower, and therefore the government will have to come and collect money elsewhere, which is why I say unrealised gains might start with superannuation at a certain level, but it will hit other assets. It could hit the family home. It is a crazy idea. Once it's on the books as a tax precedent, look out, because it could hit anything else in the economy.
Well, I don't think that's true. So, I mean, when Jim Chalmers says it's just a sliver of people who will be affected here, because it's also true that not many people have over $3 million in super, That might be short term, but what about long term? Because, I mean, more people are earning more money now from a younger age. Therefore, it will affect more people 10, 20, 30 years down the track.
I think Jim Chalmers sounds very arrogant when he talks about this particular measure. I'm not sure he even has read the legislation. The legislation actually doesn't exempt the Prime Minister. The legislation doesn't exempt any cabinet minister. There is no certainty that any of the government's ministers that could be subject to this tax will be excised. And there's no confidence that if there are losses made, that they will be offset. So I don't think Mr. Chalmers actually understands how this tax works, which is very scary.
That's an interesting point, because Jim Chalmers did say yesterday that politicians won't be exempt. But doesn't the Tax Office Code, it's Division 296, mean individuals with defined benefit interests can be excluded?
But there is no provision in the bill to exempt the Prime Minister. So as it stands, I should say, there is no provision that would allow the Prime Minister to be hit with this tax. So we would expect that, as it stands, that the Prime Minister has actually found a way to exempt himself and any other senior ministers. So I don't know how the Treasurer proposes to apply this tax to the Prime Minister and other senior ministers. We don't have that legislation. We don't have that detail.
Okay, just a final point here, because as Evan Lucas said to us in the program earlier, doesn't think this is a great idea, like you, many others as well. But they do agree that there is somewhere in super that the government could move on to raise money. So if this isn't it, what do you think is a better target?
Well, the nation's finances are in a terrible position. We're looking at 10 years of deficits. The government is having to raise all these crazy taxes, and that is going to damage investment and damage the economy. So the idea that you have to raise new taxes to help the economy is absolutely insane, and that is not the approach that Australia...
So there's not another part of super that the government could move on, that Jim Chalmers could move on, that would be better, like even indexing it?
We're already a heavily taxed country. People are hit very hard. Companies are hit very hard. There's not much reward for aspirational hard work or enterprise. And so the solution is not in raising new taxes.
Okay. We're out of time, but Andrew, good to have you with us as always. We'll chat again soon.